Welcome to Leadership Forward, where you'll meet Arizonans with innovative answers to our state's greatest challenges. I'm Dawn Wallace from the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership at the Flinn Foundation. I'm very pleased today to have a 2016 Flinn-Brown Fellow, emergency room doctor, health policy expert, Dr. Nick Vasquez. Welcome to Leadership Forward. I'm so excited to have you here. You are a well-known Flinn-Brown Fellow because not only in your work as a physician and a medical professional, but you are very engaged civically. You've been the chair of the Vitalyst Health Foundation. Certainly, you served on that foundation board when it was St. Luke's. You've been on the American Medical Association board, the Arizona Medical Association board. You're president of the American College for Emergency.
The Arizona College of Emergency Physicians.
Thank you.
State chapter.
And a whole host of other volunteer organizations, nonprofits. And so, it's very exciting for me to be able to talk to you today. You are not the traditional Flinn-Brown Fellow who comes from government, who wants to sort of further their civic engagement. You come from a very specialized vocation, and you have created this wonderful intersection between your chosen profession and making a difference and how you do that. So this conversation is going to be rich with unique perspectives and will give, I think, our audience a sense of who can become a Flinn-Brown Fellow and how they can make a difference outside of running for office or any of those traditional public service tracks. I'll share a little bit with the audience that you are a University of Arizona Wildcat.
Bear down.
Very good. We lost you for a few years to the University of Michigan
Go Blue.
Medical School, where you did your residency, but we got you back.
Residency was elsewhere. So medical school was Michigan.
Okay.
I did a post-bac program, which led to an appointment in the medical school. So I was in Ann Arbor for 5 years. Tom Brady won his championship in 1997, and then I had to wait until just this year to get another one. But I went to Yale New Haven in Connecticut for my residency, which was a 4-year-long residency. A lot of fun on the East Coast, but it's a very different world.
Different world?
Yeah.
In what way?
Number one thing I would say is there's invisible lines, whereas Arizona has people moving here all the time where there's no generation after generation staying in the same area. People move houses all the time. New neighborhoods come up all the time. Whereas in the East Coast, you turn around a corner and it would just feel like the whole culture changed. People had been there for generations, and they knew each other's families. So it's a very different experience, East Coast versus West Coast. You can talk to people on the West Coast and they'll talk back to you and not look funny at you. In the East Coast, don't talk to me. What are you talking about? It's very different. But then once you get over the East Coast sort of attitude and you get to know them, they're like friends for life.
What drew you back to Arizona? Family?
Yeah, I was single at the time, 2005. I graduated residency, didn't really have, clear plan other than return back and start my practice. And I had been interested in a lot of different things my whole life, but, family was here, so I came back for family. And it was actually one of the better choices, even though I agitated a lot for the first couple of years. Anybody who's gotten a PhD or finished a long career of study will understand once you reach steady orbit, you're used to moving forward for decades, right? You're like middle school to high school to college to like medical school to residency to work. And what do? I work. Wait a minute, where else? What am I going to learn? Where we're going next? And so it agitated a lot. My mom talked about this when she got her PhD. It was just like almost like a Peter the Great kind of like annoyance. There are no more worlds to conquer. Like you cry and you want to make sure that there's something else. Maybe I can do something else. And I started to agitate and look around. And that kind of led to a lot of different things, master's degree, Valley Leadership, and then Flinn-Brown. But it all became part of what I would advise, if you will, a medical student these days, or any student, is just follow your curiosity it will lead you a good place.
Well, that's good advice across the board, right?
100%.
And in every profession and every vocation.
Yeah.
But you didn't just work and do civic engagement. You were also a teacher, a future generation of doctors at St. Joe's and at Creighton. Tell me what that felt to you, being a teacher after you had been a student for so long.
It's incredibly privileged place to be able to teach. It's an important thing, but it really is more for me, it's much more of a personal thing. I had so many questions when I was a kid. It's so many observations, so many thoughts. And the world makes sense to me now in ways that it didn't before. And I feel that that's something that I can share. I mean, if I'm going to teach what to do in emergency medicine or, what about pathophysiology, it's not so much the perspective, but I can also share how things connect. And that's one of the skills that has helped me, over the years, and what all this other stuff has done. Whether you like it or not, we all wish our lives were just kind of this little bubble where we could control it and go, I'm going to go from point A to point B. But so many things impact policy, quality of the roads, tax base, economic output, the educational achievements. All these things kind of just play. And they have this impact. And so when I go and I teach a medical student or I advise medical students on what they want to do in leadership, and this is one of the things I really enjoy lately is that I'm asked sometimes to advise medical students on how to do leadership. I have to do, I love this one, I have to do a reset. I have to reset their expectations because most medical students have first world problems. How do I be the best at? How do I do the right thing there? And I have to reset and go, okay, how many kids were in your high school? And of those, how many graduated? And of those, how many graduated went to college? And of those who went to college, how many actually finished college? It's like 50% and then 50% and then 50%. And then how many went on to do even more? So you're like unique. You are the success story. And now you want to do more? It's like the first world problem of which car do I drive to work today? Okay. How about this? You have the trouble, the first world problem of you had choice. But the choice you have will be what you choose says no to everything else. You're going to have to pick. You're going to have to pick where you want to spend your time and then focus. And then you're going to have to let go of other things. And they don't like that. And I have to reorient them. A lot of our students, a lot of medical students, I have to reorient them to the idea that we're the lucky, we're the rich, we're the successful, we are the powerful, and your patients need you to do your best for them. Period. End of story.
Well, so speaking of that, you, as an emergency room doctor, see everything.
A lot.
In fact, you wrote an article in 2016. It's titled, "Are We Free?"
Oh, yeah.
And the subtitle or the context of it was, we're all free to make choices. And that means also making bad choices.
Yes.
And you referenced the 4 bad choices or
the
fifth.
5 bad reasons I have a job. Yeah.
And I guess I want to talk about that as the sort of context for what you just said, which is that everyone, their pathways to wherever they want to go comes from a unique place. And they're driven by different experiences, some heavily traumatic and some heavily privileged.
Yes.
And so how do you take all of these individuals and put them on a parallel path to do good things? So tell us about the 4 bads and sort of the premise around that article.
If I remember correctly, I think it was 5 bads. The 5 bad reasons I have a job were bad luck, bad choices, bad habits, bad genes, and then bad policy. So all in all, this is what comes into the emergency department. I always like to say that the emergency department is this window into the community around, and whatever the community needs are, that shows up as your patient, one by one. That's what the community is. And each ER is a little different that way. You get to see where the community struggles, where our healthcare system fails. If people can't get in to see their primary care doctor, they're told to go to the ER, right? So that's access problems. If people don't have their insulin or can't afford it, they go to the ER to try and figure this stuff out. So we end up seeing all the bad reasons why our healthcare system fails. And trying to get a student who's coming from a privileged place, who's coming from a place of how do I achieve X or Y? How do I pass this test? How do I, get this status? Not understanding how they've already won. Trying to get them to understand the milieu or the waters that we swim in is really what I've settled on. They'll eventually figure out, what's the right treatment for hypertension? What's the right treatment for high blood sugar? What's the right treatment for, sore throat? That part I don't have a problem with. What I do have an issue with, and what I do feel like I add a lot, is the emotional component, the why. Anybody who's bright will struggle more with emotions than they will with thought. The conceptual stuff is where bright people tend to be stronger at. And I'm dealing with a lot of very bright people when you're talking medical students. So trying to get them to deal with what they're weak at, which is feeling, emotions, is really how I can put humanity back into it. When I wrote this, Are We Free? It was really this question that I understood many of my patients didn't perceive that they had choice, right? They had all these different bad reasons, and I could educate them about why that was a bad reason. But I swear, I have never, ever, ever had a patient look at me and go, damn, I had no idea smoking was bad for me. And yet I'm supposed to, as a physician, the number one intervention I can do is educate, which is a very colonialist kind of way of looking at it. I'm going to tell you what your problem is, right? I'm going to tell you why your problem is this behavior. And yet there's behavioral economics that studies phenomenon that humans have that we know of, but we don't apply in medicine. And this is where we kind of get into this bigger question and this bigger problem that I've got, which is at the heart of law, at the heart of policy, at the heart of everything we do in policy, we all assume people are rational, right? And the only reason that people are rational is because you have a future you can conceive of. You have enough food, you have a house, you have a car, and you can think beyond the weekend. But if I put you in time scarcity, and any mom who is a mom is in time scarcity, never has enough time to do anything. But if I put you in time scarcity, if I put you in money scarcity, if I take away your home, I will elicit from you a number of very predictable behaviors that I see in my patients that we go, you got to educate them. This is exactly like Bill Gates going, how do I get rid of malaria? I'm going to give everybody a malaria net. Only the people he gave the malaria nets to were like, thanks for the fishing nets. We were hungry. Mm-hmm. They have different priorities. And our limbic system, the way we're built, is oriented to survive today, not tomorrow. Tomorrow is a tomorrow problem. So majority of the patients that I treat are exhibiting this thing, this behavior where they look at how do I get through today and forget tomorrow because tomorrow's a tomorrow problem and that's a luxury that I have. And yet I'm being told by people who figure out that tomorrow I got plans. I don't know. I got options. They're the ones saying this is the right treatment for this patient.
Well, in the article, it should be noted, the audience was emergency room physicians.
You got it. Yeah.
And so what I heard you saying, which is, people have choice, freedom to make these bad decisions. But how do we handle that? Do we say, well, take personal responsibility and we're not going to serve you? Or do we, as emergency room physicians, recognize what has driven people to our place of work?
Yeah.
And do we then, you never use the word empathy, but there is a certain amount of let's figure out their stories. Let's
Yep.
understand that. And then let's assign some concrete thought to how we fix that. And I feel like that was the sort of early social determinants of health conversation.
Yes.
You never use that term. And I know that it's a sort of recent term in public policy. We use it for education. We use it for healthcare. We use it for a lot of different things, housing. Tell me how that article then evolved into your work at Vitalyst around health equity and trying to solve some of these reasons, the access issue that you referenced, the scarcity issues. I think it's important to talk about that in terms of what drives people to being unhealthy and having health issues, not just focusing on why are you there at that moment? What decision have you made?
So it's not just that. It's not just empathy for the patients, which is a big part of it. It's that we're held to a standard of quality for outcomes. And yet at the same time, we are not allowed to kind of go, it's like a teacher, in kindergarten. Okay, I've got a bunch of kids who can read, some kids who can't, and I'm being held to the outcome of the whole class. It's not exactly fair if you just say all comers and I don't care about their past. That's a problem with emergency medicine. We're held to this standard of quality, regardless of the community around. But it's also a problem for our profession. So when I started in residency, we were the only place the uninsured could go. And I remember stories that were just heartbreaking. During that period of time, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, I do remember a period of time before it was passed, before it took, where the state ran out of money. Medicaid let go of childless adults. Right. And I specifically remember 2 women who were diagnosed with gynecological cancers, ovarian and uterine cancers, that had nowhere to go, that had no money. There was no resources for them. There was nothing to be done. And that still bothers me. It still, to this day, bothers me. I can see their faces. And I know one of them had resources in the form of family that was interested, and the other one didn't, because she was Latina and spoke Spanish. She had family, I suppose, but they didn't have influence. Anyway, I didn't want to get too far in there. My point was, regardless of how anybody in a privileged position decides how policy should be, how resources should be assigned, the reality comes forth in our patients. And so when I ask, are we free? There's this question of, are we really free to just ignore what our neighbor is doing and just assume that they're rational and just assume that they're going to do what's in their best interest? And then at the end of the day go, well, we need safety, so we're going to pay for prisons, or we need these people to, really take care of their health. Really? You made this kid watch her mom die from diabetes, and now you think this kid is going to have a set of habits called, I better get my health right? As far as I know, kids will do exactly what their parents did, not what their parents said. And maybe that's kind of a little harsh, but it's my experience that no matter what we say, what we do is what our kids will repeat. And at the end of the day, you have to live the difference. It's really hard. As a parent now, I can tell you, it is freaking hard to live your values. It's easier to just say them. But I see this in my patients a lot when they watch their parents die of diabetes or, dialysis, and then their behaviors are the same. They end up kind of sacrificing themselves.
And how do we intervene then, Dr. Vasquez? How do we intervene in what becomes generational bad choices
bad
bad habits?
Yeah. There are 2 ways that I know that you can intervene. One of them is more powerful, and the other one is, I guess, more easier to do. So the easier one is I can simply, in a moment, as a physician, as someone in power, as someone in authority, I can look at a person and go, I want better for you. You deserve better than this. How can I help you get better? It's a moment of recognizing somebody or acknowledging their humanity that privileged folks like physicians, like nurses, like teachers, folks who have this moment where they can notice, I notice that you struggle. I want better for you. How can I help you? I'm not going to tell you what to do. Right? I don't live your life. I don't walk in your shoes. I don't know what you face. I don't know what you deal with, but I can say it matters to me what happens to you. That part is easier to do. You have to convince the person that they matter. And if there's a chance that they'll turn around, that's how it starts, is they make a connection, an emotional connection. Because all of us in our lives, if we're successful, all of us in our lives can look back at one person who said, I'm not going to let you fail. You matter. I'm gonna spend time on you, and they convinced you that you matter, and so then you just started doing that, started acting in that way. But that's the easier way.
Well, and you said relatable. In an earlier podcast that we discussed with Taniqua Broughton, this notion of maternal health and infant mortality, she identified a lack of diversity in medical professionals as a prime reason why certain communities don't avail themselves of healthy habits, healthy medical interventions, because they don't feel that there's any relatability between them and their doctors or their nurses, because there's a lack of cultural understanding.
And that's the thing, is the cultural awareness. Yeah, you have to be, in order to cross those gaps. The weird part is I just gave this whole conversation about diversity and equity in healthcare. And really at the end of it, it's about trust. The emotions of trust is one of the basic fundamental emotions of our limbic system. And it will induce a lot of really positive behaviors if you can engender trust in a patient or a person. It's harder these days, post-pandemic, for providers to trust patients and patients to trust providers. That's one of the unfortunate side effects from our pandemic, is the amount of vitriol, anger, and attacks that we've gotten in medicine during the pandemic and after has led to a lot of people stepping away from medicine. 20 to 30% of nurses said, screw this, and then walked out the door. It's not the easiest thing to care for people. And I would say, in general, I perceive a crisis in service anywhere, of all types, whether it be teachers or cops or firefighters or, folks who work at a restaurant or anybody who works in service to other people. There's this crisis right now of, is this worth it? Is it really worth it? But I didn't want to lose the other point. You asked, how do we intervene? So one part is you just tell somebody, hey, I care about you, and you make them believe it. The more powerful thing is you teach kids to read, right? At the end of the day, you get a third grader who can read, and everything comes after that. At the end of the day, if a third or fourth grader can read, what they mean is they learn agency, right? Kids encounter themselves through the world. They encounter themselves through the events that happen to them. So if they get to the end of third grade and realize other people can read, but I can't, they look around and they go, I must be dumb, or I can't do school, or it's not for me. And I can't undo that in an emergency medicine, visit or a hospital visit or something like that. I have to go all the way back to why you matter, for you to take your medicines, for you to, take care of you, for why you should matter to you. And at the end of the day, all of our policies are around this idea that you're rational and that you're going to do what's best for you. And I say bullshit. That's not my experience. I find that people don't need paternalism. They need an understanding that at some point there's a critical intervention that either they learn that they matter or they learn that they don't. And our policies just assume that everybody thinks that they matter, because that's who writes policy, is people who got to that place because they could read at third grade and they were able to graduate from high school and go on to college. And the majority of folks that I end up treating are the ones who didn't. And I notice this gap, whether it's in education or whether it's in healthcare or whether it's in, public policy, whether it's in prisons, any of that. It's just this gap.
People ask me a lot, or did when I was in education work, what's the silver bullet? And as a general rule, policy people say there's no silver bullet, my way is whatever. I will tell you, I believe the silver bullet is reading at third grade level. And because that's when you read to learn. If you can't learn, you can't figure things out. You can't have autonomy and independence. You rely on others to tell you what's right or wrong. And so I concur with you, and we could spend probably 30 minutes on why that's important. So that's a wonderful point. I'm so glad you made it, Nick.
I have data. I have slides I could show you that very clearly state that once a kid is able to read, there's likelihood that their health behaviors improve. It has nothing to do with anything I do. If you get to 12 years of education, if you graduate high school, smoking rates go down all on their own. If you get to 12 years of high school, and you don't get there unless you can read in third and fourth grade, but if you get to 12 years of high school, seatbelt usage goes up. If you get to 12 years of high school, obesity rates go down. And if you get to 12 years of high school and you graduate high school, there is a drop in all-cause mortality, period. Better than anything I can do. This is the nuts part, is we know this, right? And yet what I'm doing is I'm cleaning up at the end, right? I'm cleaning up at the end and spending crap tons of money. And all I'm going to tell you is I wrote that saying, are we really free? Because I end up spending your money on these people's behaviors. And when we could do a better job teaching kids to read and getting over this cultural crap that we're stuck in and finding a way to do what's best for the country, I find that really frustrating. And the only way in my life I've ever been able to balance out these insights with what I do is stuff like Vitalyst, stuff like Flinn, stuff like Valley Leadership, where I feel like at least I can have a finger on the pulse, or I feel like I can have an influence.
Well, and having a seat at the table.
Yeah.
When you're talking about health policy, like you said, if you don't have a practitioner seated there telling you what outcomes look like or how your ideas might actually come to fruition or what the real circumstances are. It's kind of like having an education policy conversation without a teacher seated at the table. So I completely understand that. I wanted to, you mentioned, and it actually hurt me when you said this, it pained me to hear that we're losing, 30% of our nurses decided to leave. It's kind of like our teachers.
There's a crisis in service.
Yeah, there's absolutely a crisis in service. That's obviously the negative consequences of the pandemic. But as a doctor, did something good come out of this sort of health crisis? Did we get better acquainted with our own health? Are doctors maybe a little bit more empathetic? When you're being prepared to be a doctor, is that something that's taught too? Is patient management and how you handle people? I mean, it's...
So to answer that last question, without the pandemic, that was happening anyway. There's been a change in the way in which we recruit and train physicians since I was a baby doc. And they're recruiting a lot more for empathy now. They're absolutely recruiting and looking for not just, the ability to pass the test, but they're also looking for empathy, connection, and people skills. So it doesn't do us any good to have brilliant assholes, because at the end of the day, they're going to cause a lot of problems. So you're in this really privileged position. You can do a lot of harm or you can do a lot of good. When people are vulnerable in front of you, you have to really have this part in your heart where you care about people. And I've told folks who want to get into medicine or folks who want to get into anything to do in healthcare, we're in the business of caring about people. And if you don't care about people, you're in the wrong business. It's just not going to be fun for you. All you're going to have to deal with are people's problems. Every day, you're going to have to deal with somebody's problems. That's going to be your stock and trade. That's what you're dealing with every day. And you have to enjoy helping people solve their problems. Otherwise, it's going to be misery. It really is. Now, what happened in the pandemic, I wish I had good things to say. Trust went down between the public and physicians and between physicians and the public. Trust went down between nurses. They dealt with so much crap. Just for example, 17-year-old comes in, COVID, clearly, sick, dying, needs crap tons of oxygen. And the family's like, you're lying. I'm like, no, it's COVID. Like, no, you're lying to me. There's no such thing. I wish I could make these things up. Or somebody else who I told you, oh, you got COVID. And she's like, well, just don't give me the Fauci medication. What the hell is a Fauci medication?
It's not funny, but it's...
What happened was, I think it accelerated a trend that was happening already, which was based upon trust, based upon whom people trust. We have fragmented into multiple small groups. based upon which information source we are ingesting.
Do you think it's because society views doctors and nurses and as the elite, in that sort of academic type? I mean, do you think it's class-based to some degree?
Maybe.
That lack of trust?
Maybe. I notice it's a big difference between like men and women, which has a lot to do with how we see risk. So I see bigger patterns here. I don't think it's just culture. I see bigger patterns here when it comes to risk and events that happen in society. And it almost makes me want to go look at studies of cataclysmic events before. Well,
before the podcast, you were mentioning some differences between men and women. Can you talk about that? Because that was fascinating.
I love it. So I read this book called Why Gender Matters. And if you can't tell, I'm a bibliophile, all right? If I have any question or if I have any struggle, I'm going to go to a book somewhere and I'm going to read it, just the way I'm built. But there was this great book called Why Gender Matters. And it really boils down to, for me, how men and women perceive risk and reward. I always love women. I appreciate how pragmatic women are. Women are like, what do I get for that? What's the point? Why am I doing that? What do I get for that? And men are like, but it's cool. And I have to kind of inject some forethought into male thinking about certain behaviors. For example, I had a guy the other day having a heart attack and he's like, I'm leaving. And I can appreciate it. Look, I mean, if I didn't have $4,000 and he was facing a bill of at least $4,000 because that was his coverage for his deductible, he was like, fine, I'm just going to go home and I'm just going to eat better. I'm like, but you're already having a heart attack. Like that opportunity was missed. And it took his wife to convince him to stay. But it's that risk reward. Again, men see risk as beneficial in and of itself. They just like risk. And women are like, but what do I get for it? But men are like, but it's fun. And I have to play on that.
Well, but don't you think that risk generates chemical reactions?
Totally.
Like the adrenaline that comes with like extreme sports or things where you're, you don't know what's going to happen. Whereas, women tend to not really need to ride the adrenaline train as much, or maybe well, let me ask this. How much of that do you think is nature versus nurture?
A little bit of both. I mean, there's no way of saying it's one or the other. It's a little bit of both. So I would definitely say it has a lot to do with testosterone versus estrogen. In my experience, my perspective is testosterone gives you a false sense of capability when facing risk. And to the point where if you win, there's this testosterone effect. It's been well demonstrated. And there was this second book called The Hour Between Wolf and Dog about the impact of sex hormones on trading behaviors in Wall Street. And it was this whole exposure of how testosterone, as it goes up, men have this greater sense of tolerance of risk, but also a greater ability to manage it. It's this weird thing. It like faster reactions, better hand-eye coordination. It's a reason why, some of the baseball players were on testosterone because it actually does help. But to a point where then it becomes toxic, right? And then that toxic testosterone level, they take risks that aren't worth it. They take risks that they can't manage.
I mean, it sounds like you're addicted to something.
Yeah. For what it's worth, when I explain to my daughter, big concept, how does health work? How do bodies work? How does the world work? How do these things work? And I use Goldilocks, right? You can have too much. You can have too little. You need just right. But just right is another word in medicine called homeostasis. You get the temperature right. You get the potassium right. You get the sodium right. You get the renal function right. All of these things got to be just right. But humans have this weird thing. We're different from animals because we tell ourselves stories. These stories in our heads come from where we come from, but also our own experience, and then the information we choose to ingest. And these stories may be true, maybe not. And half of the time, I have to get inside somebody's head to try and figure out what's the story that they're telling and try and help understand, how do I put my finger on that weight? How do I get the story to change a little bit? Going back to the kids that read, the story that they learn is I can't, or it's not for me, or I don't matter. And I have to go back and go, no, actually you do. And yes, you can. If they believe me, I think there's a chance. If they don't believe me, I know how that's going to turn out. We know how that's going to turn out. You know, what's that stat? 2/3 of kids who can't read by the end of 4th grade end up in welfare or prison, right? We're willing to pay for them then.
And it's actually really not that expensive to teach kids how to read. I mean, compared to others. Well, I want to ask you one last question. This has been fascinating from so many levels, but I want to ask you, why do you love chess?
Why do I love chess? It saved me during the pandemic.
Oh, tell me about it.
Okay, so long ago, I encountered chess, but nobody played in my when I was a kid. So I kind of played around, but never played against anybody else. And I ended up going to high school, trying the chess club once. I dropped my queen. The chess coach was like, "Oh, Christmas time," and I was so embarrassed. I never went back. So I don't go back, and I'm like, chess takes a backseat to my studies and takes a backseat to my, medicine. But I was always kind of interested. It was always something that was kind of curious to me. And by residency, there was this, in New Haven, there's a Starbucks kitty corner from the British Art Museum and Skull and Bones. There's all these secret societies in New Haven, right? So British Art Museum, and right behind that is Skull and Bones, right? The secret society. So there's a Starbucks right across from there. And I used to go there, and there were a bunch of townies that would get together and would play over-the-board chess. It was the first time I ever played over-the-board chess against other people. But I spent like 3-4 years of just showing up at the Starbucks whenever I had a day off and getting a game. And it became like this social thing. So that was a lot of fun, but I couldn't do that during, my first 10 years of practice. Fast forward to having a kid, I wanted to teach her chess, but I'm not a very good teacher of chess. I didn't make it fun for her, and she would definitely let me know. So I kind of realized this is my dream, not her dream. So I freed her from that. But in the middle of the pandemic, I was like, I'll get a teacher. Let's do it. I got time on my hands. I'm not going to be able to go out and about anymore. So like a lot of people, ended up picking it back up again, and I love it. It is counterbalance. I can go be in a game and not have to worry about that patient I just saw or the family who I had to console just last shift. There's a lot of emotional burden that comes with being a physician because you see life, death, and everything in between. And for what it's worth, having this counterbalance where I can throw myself into something helps a lot. Healthy
coping skills.
Yeah.
In the form of a very strategic thinking, forward thinking.
I'm a better thinker than I am a chess player.
Has it risen to the level of being called a sport?
Yeah. I mean, these grandmasters, if you sit there, try and concentrate on something for 6 hours. Right? Sit at a table and concentrate and look like 8, 9, 10 moves ahead. It's so exhausting mentally. It really is. Yeah. Well,
thank you so much, Nick, for being with us. This has been a really rich conversation. I mean, I think for most of us, when we think of an emergency room, we think of that show, ER. And when I worked in politics, everyone would ask me, is your job like the West Wing? And I would laugh because it's absolutely not like that. Yeah. But the feeling around helping people or being in a public service role, what those sort of popular culture media they showed people is the feelings are great. Yeah. The nobility of service, and however you want to do it, there's nobility in that, and we should find a point in our life where we can do that. And so it's exciting to sit across from someone who's devoted their life to service in a different way than maybe I have, but the outcomes are the same. Yeah. Is to improve people's lives and make a difference. Suffering. Yes. Yeah. So it's been great having you here. Thank you for being on Leadership Forward, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much.
That wraps up this episode of Leadership Forward. You can find out more about the work of the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership at our website, azcivicleadership.org.